Okay, good evening. I'm sorry. I apologize for, there's always a technical issue one way or another. I apologize for that. Good evening. My name's Steve Kleppen. I'm the Planning and Zoning Director for the city, for those of you who don't know me. So what we're going to do is just I'm going to walk you through the draft regulations, give you some background, try to explain them best I can, and then I'll stay and answer any questions you have until the library folks kick us out, which probably is going to be at 8 o'clock sharp, just so you know. Yep.
Could I just say, I don't know about anybody else, but First Taxing District has 8 o'clock elected meeting. So, if you can wrap up by like 10 minutes to 8.
That's entirely up to you. That's earlier I get home for dinner, so I'm not going to complain at all.
That's it.
All right.
Sorry to interrupt.
Sure. So I'm going to go through, like I said, I'm going to go through kind of like why we're doing this, the purpose and intent, big picture changes, talk about specific changes to the kind of District A region, and then tell you about the process and next steps of getting it to the finish line. So why are we doing this? And I'm going to talk a little faster since we got a late start, but basically our existing zoning regulations haven't had a upgrade or overhaul in over 30 years. There have been a lot of piecemeal changes made to it over time. I know there are some professionals in the room who've used the regulations and are familiar with it. But there's a lot of people who, if they pick it up for the first time, they're really not going to know what to do with it. It's not structured well. There are different sections that apply to a specific project that are scattered throughout the document. It's not user friendly. It's got a lot of problems. In addition, the current zoning has over 30 zones in it right now. That's a lot of zones, including 5 separate single family zones, plus overlay zones that are, go along with that. So we wanted to do, step one is make something that's easier to use and simpler for folks. So this is an example of the existing zoning map, which is the whole map on your left. I don't expect you to try to read that, what's important and what's called out. On the left-hand side is the legend. So you can see all these different zones over here. So that's a lot of zones. A close-up, which is a little bit to the area to the east and the northeast of where we are, is a portion of the main avenue area. And you can see in a short span, there's a lot of different zones. So you'll go from multifamily to single family to commercial, back to single family to multifamily. There's really not a good rhythm or rhyme as to why a lot of these zones were created and why they're set up that way. So we're trying to take a fresh look and try to get it all back together again. Another reason we want to do this now is in 2019, we adopted a new plan of conservation and development. That's, if you're not familiar with that document, that's the guidance document for the city. Kind of says, if, when, and how you develop, these are the things you should consider and where you should consider them. Within that document, there's a future land use map. So it's a good idea to try to align best possible the future land use map with your future zoning. Now, it's not going to line up 100% because things change. If you just think about the last 3 years and all the changes we've gone through, a lot of those things weren't predicted or factored into our thinking then. So it's consistent to, make a plan going forward and stick with that. From a citywide policy, we try to focus our development near transit, infrastructure, and job centers, which I think is a common sense thing. If you really think about it, you don't want to develop out in Cranberry where there's no sidewalks, everybody's on septic and they're on private wells. So it doesn't make sense to push things out into the further areas. Try to build things around what your assets are currently. So what we've tried to put together is a kind of a hybrid code of our existing code and what we want to do going forward. This map right here kind of shows the development areas in a little more focus, and I'll touch on them very quickly going from north to south. So at the very north is the Merit 7 area. That's where the highest concentration of Class A office space is. The city last year, maybe a year and a half ago, approved a really large development on the west side of Glover Avenue. And that's kind of to create a little bit of an ecosystem up there to support that office space, as well as do that in conjunction with the new train station that's being, hopefully later this year will come online. 2 others kind of, I'd say, the significant areas of growth that we look at. One is the West Ave Wall Street area, which is your neighborhood. And then further south into South Norwalk, which if you go down there, you can see lots of projects being built and everything kind of going on. 2 sub areas, which I say are focus areas, but less intensive focus areas. One would be East Norwalk, centered around the East Norwalk train station, and also the Route 1 corridor. We're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go through. I touched on this briefly, but our existing zoning regulations are what's called Euclidean zoning. And that was basically from an old court case a long, long time ago, where basically it kind of ratified zoning and allowed people to separate uses. And the classic example from, no one's doing this today, but it prevents me from building a slaughterhouse next to your house. So it tries to separate uses and keep uses protected. That's a model that a lot of communities practice, and there's a lot of good things within it. But there are more, modern approaches to doing land use and zoning, which is what we've tried to focus on. Our code is, I would call it a hybrid code, where it has that traditional Euclidean zoning, but also looks at something called form-based code. And form-based code looks at the form. It looks at the function of your experience with the buildings, the streetscape, and how they interrelate. And it worries less about use. It doesn't ignore use. We do regulate the use, but that's not the driving factor in determining what can happen on a property. Form-based code also, which we're going to show you in a little bit, is very heavy on graphics and diagrams, which hopefully, while it's going to look completely unfamiliar to you from the current regulations, over time will make it a lot simpler for everyone to kind of practice. So the form-based code in our code's a little different than other form-based codes. It's built on what's called a transect. And this is an example of a transect. So CD for Norwalk terminology, it stands for character district, or excuse me, community district. So CD1 is not applicable to Norwalk. Think about Montana on a ranch. That might be what CD1 is. And then where Norwalk kind of comes into the picture is in the CD3 zone, which is kind of a suburban zone. We have a couple different CD3 zones where we have what we call CD3L, which is similar to what we have as our AAA zone today, down to CD3, which is a 1 and 2 family zone, which I'm going to spend a little time talking about. CD4 is kind of a multifamily zone, but a little less dense, where CD5 would be what's happening in South Norwalk, Wall Street, and then up at the Merritt 7 station. So that's a like more of an urban center. There is also what we don't have in Norwalk, which is like CD6, and that's like you're getting into Manhattan, where we have nothing proposed, anything like that. In addition, there are special districts, and that might be the hospital zone, which is also part of your neighborhood, some of the industrial zones, and there's a zone not listed here, but it's a civic district, and that's meant to deal with municipal properties, whether those are state, they could be city of Norwalk, or potentially a taxing district property too. And it's meant to give us flexibility on what we do with the city property, while also trying to protect those residential properties that might abut like a city park or a city school. So some other things that kind of drove the decision-making to get to this point is, there is a housing crisis in our area. We live in one of the most expensive areas in the country, and we also have one of the highest vacancy rates in the country. So that leads to a squeeze. So I have a 20-year-old and a 16-year-old daughter. I don't know if they're going to be able to live where I live. It just might be just too expensive for them to live here. So how do we address that? So the regulations, we hear a lot of conversation about density and over densifying. So the areas I've talked about are the areas where we're targeting our highest growth. And I think the reasons we do that are for the transit, the jobs, and the infrastructure. But we're also trying to introduce some softer density techniques into some of the more traditional single family areas, as well as areas that might be 2-family now, to upzone those to lighter multifamily, to try to, introduce some just housing choice and housing opportunity. Some other driving factors are climate change. That's something else we're going to have to deal with. And, maybe it's not today, maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 30 years, but it's going to impact where we live and how we live. Anybody who does anything with agriculture will tell you that the weather's changing unbelievably. Like I do agriculture, I know it's crazy because it rained Saturday, it hadn't rained for 3 weeks before that. It's not typical for May, it's not typical for June. The weather events are extreme and getting more extreme. It's just a fact of the world we live in today. Also, we think that the new regulations can improve the permitting process, make it simpler, make it provide some certainty. So this is what the city is asking for. So if you come in for a project, you're not guessing, well, I don't know if they're going to like this or not like that, which leads to more meetings, more expense for everybody. So it's just something we think over time will improve efficiency. And there's also discussion about what's the development community responsible for, and what should the city be providing? Should the city be providing more sidewalks? Should the developer be providing those? that's a constant tug of war we deal with, and hopefully these regulations provide more clarity on those kind of things. So this is an example of a zone that's predominant in your area, which is called CD4. CD4 is a multifamily zone. We've combined, if you are familiar with the existing zoning regulations, what's known as the D residence zone, which is a multifamily zone, and a zone which was called neighborhood business, which also allowed multifamily, but it was a little bit of a catch-all zone. So it allowed some business and allowed some residential, a little bit of a mishmash. So we've combined those two zones because they had a lot of similarities with them. Two big differences was the neighborhood business areas were a story lower in what was permitted. So we bumped that up to make that consistent. And in the D residence zone, you could not do any commercial, but this would allow small scale commercial, with the idea being it's for like a small, mom and pop shop, could be a small restaurant, a gym, very small offices, to try to introduce those into the neighborhood so you're less reliant on a car to get all your needs. Obviously, we're still a car-centric society, but we're hopeful that over time, some of these changes might reduce that reliance on a car. On the right-hand side is the next page of the regulation. So all the regulations are set up this way. They all kind of look the same in terms of the pages, but the content is different. So on the right, you're going to see some familiar terminology in terms of setback, side setback. So those are things people are used to seeing. We didn't change most of those numbers. They're pretty consistent, except for where zones were consolidated. We tried to make them, match up to the greatest extent possible. One thing we've introduced, which I think people are going to like, is this use table. So on the right is an example of what the use table looks like. Across the top is all the zones proposed in the city. And I kind of give a blow up here of what those are, starting with the CD3L all the way to the Civic District. And then the table's set up where I think it's pretty intuitive. I can tell you already that there are mistakes in the table. We already flagged them, so you might find other ones, but we'll correct them. Trust me, if you find one, please let us know. We're happy to make changes. But the table's set up so it as a P for permitted. So I think that's pretty obvious. That means in that zone, that use is allowed. NP means not permitted. PL means it's permitted, but it's permitted with limitations. So if you go to the end of the table, anything with a PL is listed in alphabetical order, and it tells you what all the limitations are. We've already found some mistakes in that as well, which we've flagged for correction, but that's how it's laid out. And SPU means it's a special permit use. So that means it has to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission. There's a public hearing involved. There's notification to neighbors. That's kind of similar to the process we follow today. Also, I mentioned earlier that the code itself has a lot of charts and graphs and images. So there's a whole list of buildings, and this is largely like a lot of the residential buildings, but it kind of tells you, all right, this is what a house looks like. That's kind of an easy one. We all know what a house is. It tells you on the right what the zones are, gives a description, and provides some parameters and a little bit of definition around what that is. Same thing, what is more applicable might be like a small multifamily building. And on the right, it tells you what the zones are allowed. Same thing with a large multifamily. Further on in the document, there's a broader description of what each one of those building typologies is, gets into more specifics about some of the rules, and again, tells you what the zones are. And we think this kind of gives a little bit of an idea if you're coming in and says, oh, I'm in this zone. These are the things I can do in the zone, and this is what the city is expecting me to build or allows me to build. So some of the big picture changes that were implemented. As I mentioned, there's little change proposed in what's currently our AAA zoning. And the AAA zoning is more on the outskirts of Norwalk, up in Cranberry, Silvermine. There's some down by the water as well, but there's no infrastructure there. They're on septic, they're on private well. So we didn't propose a lot of changes for those areas. We have consolidated some of the single family zones because we have 5 separate single family zones. Some of them are pretty duplicative of each other. The standards are very similar. It doesn't make sense to have extra single family zones when it's not really needed. One area that's gotten a lot of conversation, and you probably saw the mayor had some comments on this last week, was changing some of the single family zoning to allow 2-family zoning in those areas. So from our perspective, we don't consider it an increase in density because all those single family areas now allow accessory dwelling units, ADUs, which the city has allowed since the 1980s. So that's not really an increase in density. We actually think that the two families provide more uniformity of design, because if you have a detached ADU, that can be in the backyard and it might be in proximity to somebody's pool area or something. So that might be a change to the neighborhood. You know, we're not guaranteeing this will happen, but it's possible if you have a two-family, that can be turned into a condo. And so somebody could buy one unit, somebody could buy a second unit, and that's cheaper to get into the housing market that way than trying to buy a single family house. If you think about it, if you have two units, it's cheaper to buy one unit of a duplex than it is to buy a single family house. It's just the numbers work out that way. I mentioned, and I'm going to show you a picture of this, we're consolidating what we're considering the city's urban core, which would be kind of from north of Wall Street by Route 1 down through South Norwalk. I'm going to show you this map here. On the left is the proposed zoning for that area. This kind of periwinkle / purple color is that proposed CD5 zone that runs through the center part of the city. And on the right is the existing zoning map. So you have like 5 or 6 overlapping zones in the same geography. They all do very similar things, have very tweaks to the standards, and there's no real rhyme or reason as to why you need 5 or 6 zones. We think it makes sense just to kind of consolidate that from a functional standpoint. Only other thing I'll call out on this map is this green area. That's what the example of the civic zone. That's kind of where Lockwood Matthews is. We're also proposing to consolidate the Main Avenue, Westport Ave, and Connecticut Ave. Those are comprised of what's called business number 1 and business number 2. I don't know why we have a business number 1 and business number 2. They both do almost the exact same thing. So we're consolidating those. One thing I think, and this might not happen for 30 years, but over time, one of the goals from this plan and the regulations is to get Route 1 to not look like Route 1. If you drive to Westport, if you drive to Darien, they don't look anything like Norwalk's Route 1. And I think the reason is because we've allowed that to happen. So these regulations provide stricter standards on design, where the buildings can be located, where the parking has to be located. So the idea will be you drive down Route 1 and you're just not going to see a sea of asphalt on all sides. The idea, you'll see buildings closer to the street, parking will be to the rear, the building design will be more attractive, and the signage will be uniform. In addition, we're trying to cut down on the curb cuts as well, because that's just another major problem. So the end goal is to make Route 1 a little more pedestrian friendly, develop nodes of activity at certain key intersections, and then just improve the overall aesthetic of the area. I mentioned earlier, so the 6th bullet point there talks about consolidating the neighborhood business zone with the D residence zone. The civic zone we talked about a little bit, so I won't go into too much detail, but the idea again is to provide some relief for city properties and city uses on those properties, while also protecting those neighbors that are in proximity to those properties. On the zoning map, you may have seen along the waterfront, there's some areas labeled to be determined. We're having ongoing vigorous conversations with council about what those zoning designations should be. Hopefully we'll have a resolution to that before summertime kicks in, so we can wrap those right into the final product of the rewrite. Some of the things that, excuse me one sec. Some things that may be of interest to folks here. We're no longer regulating height by a measurement. So right now the regulations say the building can't be higher than 30 feet. I could tell you something was 30 feet or 40 feet, and I can guarantee you most people wouldn't know if you're standing 40 feet away what the difference is. But you do know what a story is. So you can visualize a story, because a story's got ground floor and it's got windows. It's got a middle floor and it's got windows. It's got an upper floor where there's windows. So you experience and see those stories, but you don't know what 30 feet is versus 35 feet. I'm sorry, you don't. Unless you're standing right under it, but that's a different argument. We don't regulate lot coverage anymore, which lot coverage is basically, if I have a piece of property and it's a rectangle, I can only build so much of that property. Now we're going to regulate what's called impervious surface. So we're looking at driveways, walkways, all your asphalt. And the idea with that is to improve drainage into natural drainage into the ground to prevent runoff, because there's nothing to prevent you today from paving your whole property. And that's kind of something that's not good for visual effects, but also not good for the environment.
The building counts as impervious too, right?
Yes. This applies more so to the more residential areas, but we're now regulating grading, vegetation, and tree removal. If you live in a neighborhood And it had a whole row of 1950s or 60s capes or ranches on it. And then somebody buys a house, they knock that house down. Maybe you've experienced this. What they do is they tend to mound up the property because the grade was probably pretty flat when they built that. They mound it up and the building gets taller, but then the water now runs off onto your property. So now we have this whole section of regulations that deals with what the slope can be, how close that grading can be to the property line, how you're removing vegetation on the property. And the idea is to, prevent drainage and runoff problems onto adjacent properties. There's more standards and I think clear standards on how lighting is impacted on properties, with the idea being we want to make sure that the lighting you're putting up in your property is not shining right onto your neighbor's property, and that there's standards in visuals in the regulations that show what's allowed and what's not allowed. Some other things we're looking at, which the commission and council has been pushing us on pretty hard, introducing more sustainability measures into the regulations. You hear a lot about solar. That's now going to be kind of commonplace and standard in the regulations when you get above a certain size project. We're revising our flood regulations. Norwalk has probably the strictest flood zone regs in the state. I think that's a good thing, but they are strict. So we're trying to be somewhat flexible in those. And we've also put in some increased notification standards for like special permits or zone changes, because sometimes people say, I never heard about this. I didn't know this was going on until it's after done and built, and then they complain. So now we're trying to put in some additional buffering standards to notify more people, and perhaps you have to put up a sign depending on the scale of the project you're doing. So what's happening here with your district? So this it's sort of a light gray, maybe gray color. This is the District A, kind of follows a very odd, I don't even know what the shape is, but it's like a crumpled up piece of paper, not a circle, I'm not sure, but it's got a lot of zones in a short area. Within that, obviously, you have some major drivers. You have Wall Street, you have the hospital, you have the main Ave corridor going north-south, and then you have a lot of mix of kind of lower density multifamily and then single family as well. So there's a lot of things going on in this area. I mentioned this earlier, we're consolidating the zoning between South Norwalk, West Ave, and Wall Street to form what we think is the urban core of the city, putting in parking exemptions in the Wall Street area for the historic buildings. There are some in place now, but I think these broaden out a little bit. And we're still working on a little bit of the zoning designation for the Upper Harbor. And like I said, I hope we'll have a resolution on that sometime later this spring, summer. We talked about this a little bit, but I can show you on a map in just a second, combining of what is the D residential, which is that multifamily zone, a little less dense multifamily zone with the neighborhood business zones, and consolidation of that into the new CD3, which is allowing 1 or 2 family zones. And again, this has had a lot of discussion. I think every meeting it's come up with somebody said, don't do it, we don't like it. And we're saying, most important thing on that to keep in mind is the draft map is a draft map. It's not the final map. It's the staff's initial set of recommendations on things. I expect the map will get revised prior to the end of June for sure. So zooming in to show you some of the changes in your area, and I tried to cut the map in half the best I could. The upper right-hand corner map is the existing zoning, where the lower left map is the proposed zoning map. So here's Main Avenue corridor kind of running, Main Street running north-south. Here's the Riverside Cemetery to give you a little bit of a landmark. And this is kind of Wall Street, which I think is more on the next map, but just to give you a sense of where we're at. On the lower part of the map where I'm kind of circling, these are the zoning categories, just to give you a sense of things. So some big changes for your area that we've proposed, and it really more so relates to the upzoning piece on the northern half of the geography. So we propose to push out the 1 and 2 family zone to the west a little bit. So you can see on the existing zoning map here, get my bearings straight, the 2 family zoning kind of stops just about here. So we pushed it further north. And one of the big drivers and one of the big employers in the city is Norwalk Hospital. So we think the more opportunities we can to provide housing in and around the hospital for, you have doctors, nurses, all kinds of tech staff, the more walkable we can make that area around the hospital, the better that will be for folks. So that's one of the drivers. And then we've upzoned some areas that are existing two-family, excuse me, which is this kind of red color you can see over here and a little bit more over here. And we're proposing to bump that up to the lower density multifamily zone. And in looking at a lot of those properties, what we think is the more likely outcome is based on the constraints built into the regulations on the density and the type of buildings that can go in there, is you'll see conversions from like 2 to like 3 or 4 unit developments. And I can't say it's not impossible. Somebody they can collect 5 or 6 properties and then build a bigger project. So that is possible, and we are cognizant of that. But I think the key takeaway for tonight is just keep in mind, everything is draft and up for discussion. It's not, Steve's not the zoning czar and gets to just say, this is what we're doing tomorrow morning. This is, we're kind of in the outreach phase of things, and then the, commission level discussions start to happen next month, and then adoption later on in the year. Yep.
On that last comment, that guy on everyone family don't buy more than one property. They have to 4 or 5 different units now and buy.
Yeah, potentially, if the upzoning were to happen, in the existing regulations allowed 2-family, say they buy 2 or 3 properties and they combine those into a larger property, they can potentially get more density by going that route.
Basically, we can have a possibility and go into now basically home.
Yeah, they'd be either like 1 or 2-family areas. Yeah, but it's the areas for the upzoning are already, to the multifamily, are already 2-family zoned.
Yeah, but you don't have that ability right now for someone to put it.
Correct,
Put it down, right?
correct,
Zoning doesn't allow that now.
correct.
It's changed.
In the D zone, you can do that. You
Yeah.
can combine
Hold on,
lots.
I don't have too much more. I'm happy, I'm happy to finish up with your question, but before we turn it over to a discussion. Going further south, the other southern part of the area, this area is a little bit easier to visualize than the other one. So on the upper map is the existing zoning. So here's Norwalk Hospital. Again, on the bottom map, here's Norwalk Hospital, and it's labeled hospital. So this D zone right here already allows multifamily. So you can see the hospital sort of ringed with that already. And then up to like I'll say northwest or the upper left is a 2-family zone. So what we've done around our, major infrastructure, major employers, major transit, is we tried to put in a 1/4 mile buffer of multifamily, and then a 1/4 mile buffer beyond that of 2-family when we could. So if Norwalk was a circle with like a donut, it would be a lot easier to do. But Norwalk's developed kind of like a cross based on where the major transit and highway access points are. So we tried to follow that model, the best possible. And there were some areas that were just kind of, there would be patches of multifamily or patches of single family surrounded by multifamily. So we tried to clean up some of those areas as well. So the upper map I mentioned is the existing zoning. So that D, which is like and hopefully it's, a little darker orange, that is multifamily. So we tried to follow that 1/4 mile buffer along, Route 1 corridor, and we brought up that multifamily into areas. Some of that, like over here, is 2-family today, but we think it's probably more appropriate if those transition to multifamily over time. And that continues kind of to the northwest of the hospital. One thing it's important too, I think, with all, I understand people's properties, and we're not trying to, do anything to encumber property values, and change is scary. I understand that. We think these changes are incremental changes. They're not happening overnight. So the research we've done, so areas right now that allow as of right 1 or 2-family, less than 50% of those neighborhoods have 2-family houses on them. So what's happening is the market is dictating what's most appropriate on those properties, not zoning. So zoning provides the opportunity for somebody to do something different, but the market is indicating what they feel is the best situation for those properties. So I got 2 more slides, and I'm happy to jump in with any questions. So this is technically the last of the district meetings is tonight, but we're having tomorrow night. I'm actually at the Zoning Board of Appeals talking to them. We have Harbor Management, Conservation Commission. I have another neighborhood meeting coming up in a couple weeks. And, so anybody who's making a request for a meeting, we did a business one this morning. I have a Realtor group who reached out to me. So we're happy to meet and chat with whoever wants to chat. We're also going to arrange kind of a meeting for the more land use professional side, where you have architects, engineers, attorneys who are, I'm sure they got 1,000 questions. So we're going to set up a daytime kind of chat to go through stuff with them. So anybody who wants to meet, happy to meet. And what I'll do once I get done with the presentation is pull up the website to show you where you can provide feedback directly to us or contact us directly. So June 21st and June 28th are two public hearings where you can come and provide any comments you want to the Planning and Zoning Commission. One of those nights, we're hoping to do a kind of a sustainability roundtable to bring in some professionals who've been dealing with this to get their sense of, what the implications are and what the costs are. Over the summer, the Planning and Zoning Commission is going to take all the feedback they've gotten and kind of digest it and then sift through the recommendations and say, all right, this change or this comment is a good one, make this change, remove that. So they'll go through that exercise over the summer. And then we're looking to have a public hearing on adoption either at the end of September, early October, with an effective date for the new regulations targeting January 1 of 2024. And the reason for that kind of separation distance between the approval and the adoption is because we have to go back and put those edits into the document. And two is, there's a lot of people who've been living with the current regulations for a long time. And I think there'll be some people who say the proposed changes are not advantageous to what my property or what I want to do. So we're going to give them a couple months to figure out if they want to do something under the old regs or the new regs. So I think that's a fair compromise. So give me one more second. I'm going to pull up the project webpage and then show you where you can get questions on your specific property or provide us with feedback. Okay, so this is the Planning and Zoning Commission page. So on the left, there's a tab Zoning Regulation Update, or you can click there. So just click on that tab. And here's like a little bit of a preamble explaining what we're doing. Below that, there's a series of information sheets that may address some of your questions. The first one is, what is form-based code and why are we doing this? There's a whole section on differences between the existing regs and the proposed regs in terms of how big buildings can be, setbacks, etc. There's a sheet that explains the proposed changes to the zoning map. This sheet here is the schedule and outreach. This will be updated Friday because what we're doing is taking all either the PowerPoints or the recordings from these meetings and we're uploading them into one spot. So if somebody wants to say, well, I heard you say here, you said one thing here, you said something different, you can go back and call me out as much as you want. There's a sheet here that talks about changes to the flood zone. One talks about changes to the Coastal Area Management Act. One sheet on sustainability and what we're doing differently. And also one on changes to the grading, drainage, and the vegetation. So if you come out of here tonight and you're like, you forgot to ask me a question or you want to reach out with a question or comment, you can, on that same page, just below those information sheets, you can just click on this tab. Up pops an information sheet. First question is just kind of, who are you? We want to just get a little information that way. Second one is, what is your question or concern related to? And the articles align with the articles in the proposed zoning regulations. And just below that is where you can provide your written feedback. So this written feedback is all getting downloaded into a spreadsheet. I absolutely promise you, I won't edit any comments, no matter how rude they are. I'm not saying you will, but we're not going to make any changes to those. City staff will provide a comment or response to those comments, and all those are going to get uploaded to this page. So everybody can look at what everybody else is saying, as well as that'll get sent to the Planning and Zoning Commission so they can make the final ruling on what gets included. The last thing I want to show you before I turn it over to you is the zoning map itself. So this one right here is a standard PDF, a traditional zoning map. You just click on it, you have to zoom in to figure out where you are. This one I think is pretty cool. I did not do it, beyond my skill level. But this is a little disclaimer pops up, just click, yes, I agree to your terms. So I'm going to use City Hall because that's an easy one to pop up. So I've done it a few times. Just keep in mind that this is a GIS database that's pulling from lots of places. So you have to click Norwalk. You don't want to click Norwalk, California, or Stanford or Darien. Just make sure you click on Norwalk because you're going to get really confused. So up pops 125 East Avenue. Just click on the parcel. So what this shows you is the existing zoning here. And for some reason, some of the properties, the existing pops up first and some the proposed pops up first. We can't figure out why. We stopped worrying about it and we just moved on. But this one conveniently pops up the existing zoning regulations. There's a link to that. And then there's a link to what the bulk and height schedule is for that zone. If you click this arrow at the top, this will take you to the proposed zoning. So that's proposed to go from the East Avenue Village District into the Civic District. And this looks similar to what we showed you before. There's a little preamble to the Civic District. Here's all the standards related to the Civic District, and you can scroll down through those. And the other link that is there, which will be helpful for you, is a link directly to the use table, which we talked about a little bit. I'll blow it up so you can see it a little bit better. But this is at the top, as we talked about earlier, these are all the zones in the city. So every zone that's there. And then down through here are all the uses. So one thing right now in the existing zoning regulation, every zone is just a list of uses. So it's really confusing, and conveniently enough, there are no page numbers and they're not in alphabetical order. So now you have a table that are all grouped together by the type of uses. This happens to be the residential. The retail would be grouped together. Service would be grouped together. Industrial would be grouped together. So you can kind of see what lines up. And then these are those categories we talked about, whether it's permitted, not permitted, special permit, or permitted with limitations. So I think that's pretty handy and hopefully will make things clearer over time. And with that, I will shut up and listen to you. So anybody who is zoomed in and wants to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand feature. I don't see any phone numbers, so you can use your hand feature, and then I'll go through who in the audience here who has a question first, since they braved the rain, and then anybody at home, I'll grab them after. So anybody, if I don't mind, if you don't, just come up to the microphone because that's where it's going to get picked up the audio, and then just give your name and ask away.
Hi, my name is Elsa Peterson Obachowski. I have 5 questions. I'll try to make them quick. At the very beginning of the presentation, you said that the vacancy rate here is among the highest
Lowest.
in the, but you said highest, so I thought you meant lowest.
I did.
You probably meant that the occupancy rate was among the highest.
I don't know if it is, but it's high.
Yeah, okay, so the vacancy rate is among the lowest in the
Correct.
nation.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so my first question is a yes or no. Are there any places in Norwalk that are being downzoned where they currently allow 2-family or more, and they're being changed to where only single family would be allowed?
There are areas down zone, but I don't know if they're specific to the residential component. I have to look.
Okay,
If you email me, I can give you a specific.
no, I just think that a lot of people might be interested in that, since this question of upzoning or downzoning seems to be a really
Right.
hot button issue. So maybe the next time, maybe you could include
Yeah,
that in
we
your.
are putting another information sheet together that addresses a lot of the upzoning to the 2-family, multifamily, and what the, various stats are behind it. Because
Great.
it's, yeah.
Okay, so my next question also has to do with that. So if someone currently lives in a single family house and they say, oh, now that I'm allowed to, I would like to convert my single family house to a 2-family so it can be an income property, or so I can sell half of it. But you would have to have enough land for the required parking spaces, right? So it seems to me that very few houses on small lots would actually be doing this. So if, people are saying like, oh, my neighborhood is already dense enough. We have all small lots. What are we going to do? We have 2 families all over the place. The person next to me changes their house into a 2-family. But in reality, a lot of this could not happen because there isn't enough land for the required parking spaces. Am I right?
It's possible, so it's, and I'm glad you mentioned that because it's a good point. One of the complaints that we heard about going from the 1 to the 2 through all these meetings was parking. It's already overflowing with parking. Where are people going to park? So if you convert to a 1 to a 2, now it's possible some people may just add on. It's also likely somebody may tear down and go from 1 to the 2. If you do that, you need to provide us with 4 conforming parking spaces.
Right.
So in those conforming parking spaces have to be to the side or the rear of the property. There's specifics on how big they have to be. So somebody, to your point, may not be able to physically do it, or they may have to scale their project back.
Right, thank you. My other 2 questions have to do with the hour today. So on the front page of the hour today, above the fold, there's an article about experts saying that the streets in Norwalk, mainly South Norwalk, need to be raised by 3 feet because of flooding that happens all the time. And it seems to be happening more often. So you don't have to answer right now, but I would be interested to know whether the zoning takes any of that into consideration. And then on the last page of the front section, there's an editorial about affordable housing. And it says that the state required every Connecticut town to turn in a plan for affordable housing by June 1st of last year. And Norwalk is one of the towns that hasn't done it. And it says that there was a media inquiry sent to the towns, and that Norwalk was one of the towns that didn't answer the media inquiry about what's our plan for affordable housing. It seems to me that Norwalk has done a lot more than many other towns about affordable housing. So I'm just a little bit puzzled about why Norwalk didn't answer. And again, you may not know the
That I
answer to
don't know
that.
why we didn't, but I actually remember both questions, so I'll hit both of them.
Yeah.
for
I
the-
can email you both of these questions.
No, I can
afterwards.
do them now.
Okay.
That's no problem.
Okay, thank you.
So for the talking about the flooding, that's related to a circus study that my office is actually overseeing in partnership with the state branch of UConn. So we're well aware of the changes they're talking about it, and they're well aware of the proposed zoning, and we're talking about how the two work hand in hand and impacts from that, how it gets tied into our code. So we're very cognizant of that. Affordable housing plan is actually a plan that we're going to do. We told the state we were not going to meet their deadline. I'm actually on a state panel that's overseeing land use decisions and recommendations on the state. Affordable housing plan and what should go into the affordable housing plan was one of the areas that was talked about. There was a subgroup that looked at the affordable housing plan submitted, and I'll try to be nice, but some of the plans that were submitted, a good portion of them were just kind of check the box plans that did that. So we didn't want to do that. The timing was bad because the census data hadn't been released at that time. And if anybody's, one probably has, but the state statute that says you have to do this affordable housing plan didn't tell you what to put in the affordable housing plan. So we said, let's wait till the state guidance comes out, and let's wait till we have actual updated census data so we know what we're talking about. So we actually have a consultant on board. They're starting to do some basic work now, but it's going to kick off in earnest in the fall. So yeah, we're very cognizant of that. And I think once that study is done, it may inform future changes to how we handle our workforce housing regulations that we currently have. Somebody else got out of question. Whomever, it's fine.
Hi, Rich Bonifant, Park Hill Avenue. And this is a question and answer period. So, and I'll save my main comments for the public hearing because there's no zoning commissioners listening to this anyway. So, but thank you,
No,
Steve.
that's not true.
Well,
I can see one.
all right. All right. But thank you, Steve, for, beating yourself up 3 nights a week for and getting home late to your family. We appreciate this.
They're not upset.
All right. Well, that's between you and them. Anyway, I think you know how I feel about changing the single family zones to a 2-family zone. But I will take advantage of the time that we have at least 3 city council people here. And I just want to say that some of us invested into a single family zone and we expect it to stay that way. And we hope that you will advocate for us because you're the elected officials and unlike other zoning hearings, that you're not allowed to, if it's an individual application, you're not allowed to talk to a zoning commissioner in between this. In this case, it's a general thing, and you are allowed to lean on them in any way you can, okay?
That's not a, I just said, say that
Well,
town attorney's office disagreed. We had that conversation at our last. meeting.
okay, but there you go.
They said the commissioner should not be talking to anybody outside of the meeting.
Well, this is not an individual application, but you know, hey,
That's what they said. So
okay, all right, yeah, I'm not gonna, me and you aren't gonna argue about that
You can
right now.
talk to me and beat me up anytime.
Yeah, it's okay, but I just want to say, we're asking our city councilmen to step up for the people that elected you. Thank you. All right, and I just want to say that the difference between an ADU, which is an accessory dwelling unit that are allowed, and a two-family zone is the owner has to live in one of the units on an ADU, and that's a huge difference, all right? As opposed to somebody making a duplex and being an absentee landlord and letting it go down, all right? You mentioned about Route 1 and parking in the rear. Well, it might look good when you're driving by, but it can be a nightmare for the people living behind it when all the partying and the bottles start smashing. But that's, you know, here you go. When you say the waterfront is to be determined, well, while I'm not a boater, I am a member of a boat club, and I do respect all the boating and the recreational boaters. And I hope this is not a long-term plan to push boating off, because that's going to be a difficult sell there. When you mentioned about grading, where you said that you notice that people upgrade so that the flood runs to somebody else. I've also noticed the opposite, where as soon as somebody buys a property, that they strip off the first 3-4 feet of the good topsoil that's there since like the Indian days. And they'll sell that for 10 grand and put the rocks and the junk in there and get started there. And when you say it's incremental, don't worry about it. Well, that's like a slow destruction over 20 years, and that's what you're going to end up 20 years from now. So thank you very much for all your presentations.
I'm Todd Bryant, 23 Morgan Avenue, right over there. And I'm also the president of the Norwalk Preservation Trust. So I have a couple of comments, mostly about the only real mention I could find about historic properties here was in the historic district section. It's 3.3.4B. And it refers to a historic district commission, which we don't have, but we should.
Yes.
Under the city charter and the state law, the historical commission should be a historic district commission. And what is now the historic district around the green is in fact a local historic district. So I'm wondering if somewhere along the line, based on this zoning revision, that you might be able to actually get somebody to implement that.
Yeah, actually, I don't know if you know Michelle in my office.
Yeah.
Andruski. Yeah, her and I were talking about that last week. So,
Yeah, I've been talking to her about it too.
yeah, it's been on the radar and yeah,
For maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
But and another thing, and I don't know where it would go here, but based on two situations that you know very well, I'm sure. One is the Tom Rich Hotel expansion on South Main Street that'll take out a building in the historic district. That's extremely important to the streetscape there. And the other is the Cemetery Street development. And based on those two things, I think there should be more requirements for a developer who is going to build something or asking to build something that will impact a property either in the historic in the National Register, the State Register, or the city's historic resource inventory. For example, the Tom Rich thing, there was no study required to see if that building could be incorporated into his development. And since it was a National Register property, I think that should have been done. And I think that should be part of the general requirement in, and it needs to be a third party review of that, not a tame, a tame consultant.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd say, and if you have sample language you've seen elsewhere that works, please forward it on. I'm happy to take a look. Only thing with that one, and it might not be a planning and zoning thing, is they could have just come in for a demo permit and, it would get protested, I'm sure.
Oh,
They-
it did.
But they could not say went through and they just knocked it down. Then there's nothing there. And the Planning and Zoning Commission can't say, go back and rebuild the historic building. They can't.
Right.
Yeah.
Why
And-
not? Anybody.
Yeah, I don't know if it's zoning thing, but I get your point.
Yeah, but I mean, there's gotta be, and in terms of the cemetery street, I mean, that's the oldest cemetery in Norwalk. There are at least 6, first settlers in that cemetery. And there was no requirement to find out if there was a might be a drainage issue, if there might be a vibration issue because of construction, nothing.
Yeah, that one I'd probably part ways with you on. I think, don't know how that would impact the cemetery very much.
Well, I don't either, but that's why you need a study.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my question. I mean, nobody knows what's gonna happen there. Or if anything, maybe they come back, the study comes back and it says, no effect. Fine. But we need to know, because that's really, really important. So, other than that, I'm delighted that you're doing this. It's been needed for a really long time. And I like the hybrid approach between Euclidean and form-based because that makes the most sense. So, thanks for all that. There's some good stuff in here, but it could be better. Thanks.
Always good, yeah. Oh, I think 8, 7, 8.
Hello, my name is Alan Counts, 17 Levine Street. I just wanted to revisit what I'd asked earlier concerning the density issues concerning if you have a one-family property now. And we mentioned that if you can have a developer or anyone who would purchase adjacent properties next to it. And you have mentioned that they will be able to combine those properties together and build a multi-unit building.
Yeah, I'll double check, but I don't think there are, if there are, I think it's very rare, but I don't think there's any zones that we took from one family to multi. So for clarity purposes, we define, single families, obvious, two
Mhm.
families is 2, and multi for us is 3 or more. So there are areas that went from 1 to 2.
Yeah.
Or from 2 to multi.
Okay, so therefore, so then if I had 3 separate parcels, the developer wouldn't be able to have those parcels attached. He would have 3 separate 2-family zones, 2-family buildings.
Yeah, so if you're talking about, it's just to clarify, if you're talking about an area that we've proposed to take from a 1-family zone
To a
only to a 1 or a 2-family, there probably wouldn't be a big advantage for combining lots because you can only do 2 on the lot anyway. So
Okay,
they'd probably be more likely looking to carve off some land and do something different that way. It just wouldn't make sense to combine because if you have a bigger lot, you're just putting a 1, 2-family on a bigger lot versus, the idea would be if I was developing, I'd want the lots to be the minimum they had to be, and then build a 2-family on each one of those.
Mhm.
That's from an economic standpoint.
Yeah. And also you mentioned that you're moving from height to stories.
Yes,
But are there any conditions in terms of how high a story can be?
yes, thank you, because I didn't say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, within each story has a maximum floor to ceiling
Yeah.
height, and we're clarifying the language because somebody said it's not clear, so we found a way to make it more clear, but it's regulated how high, like the ground floor is allowed to be a little taller,
Mhm.
and then like the second floor, and I think the half stories max out at like 10 feet. And what
Okay.
we tried to do was line that up pretty close to what the existing height standards would be today,
Mhm.
so it's not going to be a big change.
Yeah, that's my big concern, that you can have someone who puts a two-family home in his, each story is 13, 15 feet high.
No,
That's
that-
gonna tower over my existing
Yeah,
house
that,
now.
that wouldn't be allowed.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. You're next.
Oh, go ahead. No, I'm wait, I thought everyone was done. You sure? You sure? I mean, I have no problem waiting. Jason Milligan, 11 Belden next door. I have, first, I wanted to start by saying I commend you for taking on this enormous project. You're not going to make a lot of friends, you're never, not going to please everybody. Everybody's got complaints. And you're providing a solution. So I really do commend it. And I don't agree with everything that you're putting in here. I think you're making an extreme effort and I think your outreach is incredible. If you're two people gathered together, you're willing to go meet with them. And I think that that's a big part of it. And everyone's not going to agree at the end. So and I do think that you're looking to make it make sense. So I mean, you deserve credit for that. I have my own personal beliefs about this Wall Street area, and I think that you're doing a decent job at that, and I'll talk to you more in some of these other smaller meetings. I wanted to just talk about affordable housing because that is a topic that is very hard to discuss in a rational way, and even the state regulations are not very clear. I don't think we could ever possibly achieve the goals that we've set out because they're not clear. When are you successful? What is affordable housing? We don't even define it in a clear way. So when you talk about it, you can always wrap yourself in this vague thing. And if you're working for affordable housing, you're good. And a lot of times, and I know personally, I provide housing that is less expensive than what is categorized and celebrated as affordable housing, but my housing does not count as affordable. And that goes because you have to deed restrict it. And there's other things you have to do. You have to file with the city. And then our regulations require affordable housing to be equal to the other units that you have in a project. So there's simultaneous things happen. You're squeezing the natural tendency to what would make it cheaper, like less expensive to rent or own would be smaller, less bells and whistles, less features. You're requiring the bigger features, the more expensive stuff. It's problematic, right? And then also you're requiring every single owner to be involved in that process. There's efficiencies. There are people who specialize in affordable housing and they're very good at it. They're used to filing the paperwork, which is costly. The cost of compliance is high, especially when you're pushing it onto a mom and pop type of developer. When they're doing a handful of units, they need to learn all of that ins and outs of the compliance. And I think if our goals are set out, we'll find a less expensive, easier way to get what we're after. It's easier said than done because I think that there's some people that want to have more control over it. But anyway, can you talk a little bit about, like, you say affordable housing, our workforce housing rules don't exactly line up with the state. They're getting closer. And how do you account for naturally occurring affordable housing?
So the couple of things, I think in the Planning and Zoning Commission had a meeting last week for a project in South Norwalk where they actually were trying to push for a higher percentage of the workforce units within the development. But I think that, my kind of point to them would have been, we're about to take on the study. A lot of these questions will get answered as part of that. So I don't want to say, let's do this all right now. There is a change in the workforce housing regulations that goes into the new regs dealing with commercial projects where they have to pay a fee as part of that, an impact fee. And I think it's at a certain size property. Sure. So is this a little better? Okay. So our workforce regs, we are compliant with what the state requires, which is 8-30G is the statute that, and if you're familiar with that terminology, I've heard it before. If you're in Westport, Darien, Wilton, New Canaan, that's like a 4-letter word. They hate it because it's a zoning busting provision where someone could come in. If you don't meet the 10% threshold, the state requires units to be deed restricted. How they define affordable, you're subject to, they can do pretty much whatever they want on the property in terms of what the zoning regulations allow. So we're at 13.2%. So we're over the 10% required. But what does that mean? To your point, I don't know what that actually means. I don't know. Is that the right percent? What's the right percentage to hit at? Zoning is not the only tool to deal with affordability. I think we do a good job of the workforce housing, and I think deed restricting it is important because it, we base ours off of, there's two formulas, one's based off the 80% of the state median income and one's based off 60% of the state median income. So you have two paths you can take with that. And I think ours works pretty well. I mean, I get your point because it's easier on like a Waypoint project when you have 300 units going in and 10% of those units have to be deed restricted. So you have 30 units that somebody administers and you can hire a third party to, handle that. Plus they're doing 3 other projects. So it's the cost is spread out among many, many units.
And there's consultants that provide those services as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know, it's a good question for, maybe it's something Michelle in my office is the housing planner as well. I can ask her to reach out to some of the providers that handle that service to say if they've ever experienced somebody that's kind of worked in like a pooling setting to, this guy's got 3 units, this one's got 4 units. How is there a more cost-effective way to do that? I mean, I get it is paperwork and it's time consuming, but I think it definitely serves a purpose. But the bigger picture for me is we're about to take on this housing study. What's that going to inform us on what we actually need for affordable units? Because there's a segment below that 60% state median income, which I don't think zoning is necessarily meant to handle, but that might be more appropriate for work in conjunction with the housing authority and things that they're doing and other programs available. So there's a lot to it.
So I asked about the naturally occurring. Do you have anything to say about that? There's no accounting for that whatsoever.
No,
And
And I
Norwalk's
don't know
pretty,
how
Norwalk's
we-
pretty high on that list. Like if you actually counted those, we'd probably be 20 something percent. So then when is there enough affordable housing?
yeah, and I don't know how to regulate that because I know like when we did rezoning in East Norwalk, we were talking a lot about Osborne Avenue area, which has a lot of naturally affordable units. And like, well, like somebody's like, oh, we'll change the zoning there. I'm like, if you change the zoning there, everything there is going to be gone. And you're losing all those cheaper units. So I don't know how, I don't have an answer for that. Sorry.
So, but the other thing is there's plenty of gaming of the system. So the bigger developers, they push for area median income. And the rents that they're actually charging are not affordable. And that gets lost in the shuffle because everybody applauds they use the right vocabulary. And you have places like Osborne and you have units like that I provide that are low frills. And so I'm constantly talking to you about lower the standards on what you have to build, right? Some people will take the low frills, the smaller units, and the less rent. We keep requiring more and more things to be included, recreation space, libraries, yard, parking, solar,
We took rec space out.
I know in some of the places. So, but that's the last question on this. The area median income and they're higher.
Ours is all based off state median income. So nobody can use that in their calculation. They have to provide everything for us. Other communities do.
But
it.
830G counts for the 10%. They use area median income
No,
and then they get the tax credits. What?
no, it's state.
Well, no doubt. So, okay, I'm not going to pepper you on that. That's not what this is all about. Good job on the zoning. I'll talk to you more about the other stuff.
Can't wait.
It'll be less like that.
Hello, my name is Ann Holer and I live near the Norwalk Hospital. I'm very concerned. You talk about it's a crowded area already. As a matter of fact, I have the helicopter that goes right through my parking lot. And on occasion, I live on the 3rd floor. I can look out and see his metal running things. And then he goes over and he goes to the landing zone there. I don't like it. We're overcrowded as it is. You say you want to put in 2-story houses over that area. You want to encapsulate us into a little section of each zoning area, which seems to be, here's your area. You stay there, you got your little schools, you got your little stores, you got everything there. And that's it. Here's my encapsulation. Other places in the city will have their own encapsulation. I don't want to live in a 15-minute city. Okay. And also a lot of people know that we have WW 169.org. And that's the show about the towns that you're starting from Greenwich, doing the whole seaboard first. And it's going to be all changed. And then we'll come into the inner city of the interstate of Connecticut. And then everything will be changed and changed and changed. Where I live, I like. I don't want it changed. I don't want to be forced to have a 2-family house when I'm in a 1-family house. I don't want to have people living there that I don't want to have tenants. Because some of them, they're just not going to be good. I live in a building with tenants. They don't care. They don't live, they don't have any things, what do you call it, to be there with them. They don't care. They're there, they're renting, that's it. They'll get out whenever they're going to get, or they're going to stay, and they're not going to pay any rent. So I'm just disgusted by all your proposals.
So even if we change the zone on whether it goes from a 1 to a 2 or a 2 to multi, no one's forced to do anything. You're not required to put up, no one's coming to say, knock your house down, we're putting up a 2-family here. It's your choice. It gives an option for you or a future property buyer to do something on the property. And the market will dictate what's most appropriate for that location.
But you also, as far as I know, you didn't make any study on the traffic around the hospital, the emergency room and everything. We can't get out of our parking lot.
So
It's not right.
So this question's come up before about whether you do a traffic study. So the scale of what we're talking about and how the change is going to occur, because it's not going to happen overnight, because as I said, we've had areas of the city that have had 2-family zoning for 100 years, and less than half of those properties that could be 2 families have gone that route. They've stayed single. And so that tells you it's happening very incrementally, if it's happening at all, and the market's dictating what should happen on those properties, not zoning. So we provide options and tools, but we don't provide mandates that you have to do something like that.
Let me ask you, do you live in Norwalk?
No.
I know. So frankly, what do you care?
Well,
You
that's
know?
kind of a little bit insulting, but the
It's
fact
not,
is,
it's
no, it is
honest.
because you don't know me. You
I
don't know what
don't.
makes me tick or why I do this job. I think me not living here provides a very unbiased view of things. So I'm not emotionally attached to the decision I make. The gratification and the reward I get is by doing what I think is right and what is a good job. So I can make a recommendation. I think this is what should happen, and here's my reasonings why. And the city has to decide, Steve, good idea, bad idea. We're not going to do that. So it's not my decision on any of this.
It's not your decision alone. True. Okay, but when you hear people that don't want a lot of changes, why are you forcing it on them?
So we're not forcing anything. We've proposed things. The Planning and Zoning Commission themselves will have to decide whether they want to enact all the changes, some of the changes, or none of the changes. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that will be their decision, not ours.
Okay, what about the beach property? East Norwalk,
Which, I'm not sure which property.
East Norwalk properties down at the beach area.
What specifically?
They're going through changes. They don't want to go through changes either. They
I'm not
like
sure
where
which
they
property.
live.
I mean, I know East Norwalk's had some contentious conversations in the past, but I'm not sure which property it was.
They're just people that live there that are unhappy. So, I mean, people are very unhappy. And I'm not here to stand here and I don't mean to be mean to you, but I don't want to
Okay.
I don't want to kiss you. And you know what I
I
mean?
prefer that
And-
as well. Don't take that as
No,
an
no, no.
offense.
What I'm trying to say is, I don't want to, blow kisses at you, I should
You
say.
don't have. to.
And,
It's
and
fine.
let you think that I'm pleased with all of this because I'm not. And
Well,
a lot of people aren't either.
I'd say.
And I'm
the
not
best
being
thing to do
insulted by
is-
it, you know?
is Put your concern in writing, and that way it's part of the record. There's 2 hearings, the 21st of June and the 28th of June. You can voice your opinion there again to the Planning and Zoning Commission, who will be the ones that ultimately make the decisions on things.
Dude, I'm sorry, but I'm just very angry.
I can understand.
And that's all I have to say.
Sure, no problem. I think it's you. Better hurry up before they.
I'm gonna go again.
And anybody who's online, if you want to talk, just use the raise your hand function, which is at the bottom. You want to, I can. Sure. Improvise.
Oh, this is.
There you go. Oh, you wanna come up? It's okay. It's a little tight to get that far. Come. Oh, yes. there,
All right.
Got it?
Thank you so much.
Wow.
Yeah. Good evening. My name is Joanne Horvath, and I live in a B zone. And I too am very discouraged about what's could happen to our neighborhood. Our neighborhood consists of, like, I would say we have, I live at 1 Cobbler's Lane, and there's maybe 30 houses on that street. And they're all basically the same, small ranches. There's a few that are not that way, but the majority is consistent. And we didn't know anything about this meeting, the District G meeting at all. The only reason why my husband and I did find out about what was going on was that we saw in the newspaper about the Village Creek. People were speaking up. So in my opinion, there was not good outreach. I thought it was very poor. All the meetings should have been given to the Norwalk Hour to alert residents ahead of time in order for them to digest the material ahead of their designated meeting date. Someone called me and asked me if I knew something about a meeting being held at Merit 7. And I said, no, I had no idea. I thought it was something in regards to Mirror Parkway, but it wasn't. So that's how I got wind of this somehow. But reading about the Village Creek outcry really got me on board here. We live in a B residence zone. Like I said, all the houses are about the same. This would open up, I believe, from what I can recall in the notes, facilities for childcare, group homes, other type of uses that are not presently, I guess, allowed in our area. So I'm not happy about that. I think people, if they don't know what's going on, it's really not a good, it's not transparent. Let me put it that way. Now you did mention in this little sheet that I got on the web about water source, you know, if you had a, why not keep residence B? And if you had something that's near water, then you could put B water or B whatever you want to put. And it also was mentioned in that Village Creek article about why this was being done. It was to prevent some lawsuits. Now, I've never heard of any lawsuits about this. I'm maybe on bigger properties like special permits, things of that nature, but not residential zones. So I don't know what the rationale is for that. Okay, and then reading this, reading this also, this is called upzoning. Well, I don't call it upzoning, I call it downzoning. We have the perfect property to have, we have a long driveway, too wide, and we could fit 4 vehicles in the driveway. So that would be 2 vehicles for half a duplex and 2 vehicles for the other half. But what about the guests that these people would have? We have a small street. It's a school bus route. And right now there are traffic of people parked on the street and only 1 car can get through. So the infrastructure is not in jive with what is going to be proposed for our area, at least in my opinion.
If I'm not gonna cut you off, but if afterwards, show me where you live again, once we're all done,
Okay,
and then I can probably easier to answer yours offline with that. but-
so. should I
No, keep going. It's
Oh,
fine if you
keep
want.
going. Okay, gotcha. Okay, um. Let me see. Even if this proposal is that you've grouped us in with the Merit 7 area and the Route 7. Well, on Creeping Hemlock, Lower Creeping Hemlock, there are no sidewalks to get down to Main Avenue. And even if you did, the Merritt Parkway owns that property there. You'd be walking on the Merritt Parkway land there. And I mentioned something about sidewalks years and years ago. Nothing happened. Yes, we're on a bus route, but still, I don't think anybody is going to be walking over to Merit 7 for working or anything else. All right, now there's about this housing crisis. What about all the, excuse me. I don't know what that's supposed to be. What about all these other buildings we are building in Norwalk? We've really done our share. I think, in fact, I think we've overbuilt because we're going to choke ourselves out of the traffic. I'm on the Merritt Parkway interchange project PAC person, and we're still working on that. That's been held up, and it's still not going to happen for maybe quite a while. So the infrastructure doesn't match what these zoning things are providing. Gristmill is terrible, and I'm not going to go into any of that, but anyway, you're not going to change the AAA zones because they have no sidewalks. So that's my issue with a Creeping Hemlock. And furthermore, on Creeping Hemlock, looking at the map, there's a part of Upper Creeping Hemlock on the left-hand side that is going to change from B to C to CD3. And the other half on the Merritt Parkway side is going to remain the same, which doesn't make any kind of sense to me. Once you go around Butternut, they're not changing that. So people in that street, you've got one side one way and the other way. And I don't even think they know anything about it. Let's see what I want to say. Now, you talked about a flood zone, and I think that's very important. But I feel, I mean, probably with the current zoning laws that we had at the time, or we do have, when they rebuilt Washington Village on Water Street, I said to myself, I don't believe that they would put people back onto Water Street when that area floods. I just didn't make any kind of sense to me. And it's been like that for 50 years. That's a flood zone. And it even mentioned it today, they're going to raise the street or something to that effect. Okay, now I mentioned about that. Okay. So now we're going to have these public hearings on the 21st and the 28th. So that's just going to be a preliminary thing until they absolutely have the adoption at the end of September. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know when the September, it could be early October, but that's
Right. Now, why are we rushing this kind of thing? I mean, we've had these laws on the books since what, 1929 or whatever. So when you're talking about like, I can't say money issues for elected officials or whatever, people get a little on the, I don't like that kind of thing. And even touching their homes. Their home is what they bought, what they sacrificed for, what they have improved on. We've lived in our house for 40 years and we've done a lot to the property. And we continue to do it. So that's an investment that we made for ourselves, but as well as for the neighborhood of Norwalk and the potential people coming in. And that's why it's such a highly rated area. So if you can think about those things or pass it on to the Planning and Zoning Commission, I would certainly appreciate it.
Yep, we will.
And I appreciate you coming out tonight and taking all the, well, comments, good and bad. But that's, my husband and I are really irate.
Sure. So when we're done, just come up. I want to make sure I know what you're talking
Okay.
about. Again,
Thank you very much.
I think I do, but I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Anybody else? And anybody again, last call, if you're virtual, you can use the raise your hand function. So far, nobody has.
Good evening. My name is Craig Flaherty. I am president of Redness and Mead, a land use consulting company with offices in Stamford and Wilton. I'm here tonight representing Harborview Norwalk LLC. Harborview Norwalk LLC. Maybe we can point this up. Thank you. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Harborview Norwalk LLC owns most of the units within Harborview condominiums at 43 Harbor Avenue. We simply want to submit a formal request for consideration of that property to be in the CD5 district, currently planned to be in the CD4 district. It is immediately abutting the Waypoint development. It abuts the CD5 to the west and north. It is across the street from some industrial zones. It's a 78-year-old two-story brick series of buildings that are showing their age. And the property owner has been considering redevelopment for some time. But given the fact that the city is now in the process of their own zoning amendments and zoning map changes, it was ill-advised to try to submit ours and requests in a parallel process. So again, we'd just like to make that formal request that it be considered on the record. I have a hard copy here to hand to you, and we'll submit it via the online portal as well. A part of that is a study of locations where the CD5 district abuts the CD4 district. And we think that the height provisions need a closer look at those abutting points. So thank you very much.
Sure.
So I already spoke, but I just like to point out, to expand on one thing that you said, Mr. Klippen, about that the overall, the revision of the zoning regulations will be more user-friendly. And I think someone pointed this out online, but I'd just like to reiterate that it would actually make things more advantageous for small builders, small developers, and individual homeowners and property owners, because as you said, there will be more certainty. It'll be better organized so people can figure out what they need to do to comply, and it will be a more efficient process for people who want to rebuild, renovate, or do something new with their property. Thank you.
I know. And then I'm short. That's okay. Nicole Ayers, 7 Ohio Avenue. From the schematics that you have presented, I just want to bring to the attention a particular area. The area of Orchard, Academy, and Merwin. I remember when that neighborhood was a neighborhood. When Waypoint came and the next, I don't know what the thing next to the Waypoint, where the old Lomans used to be, it has drastically changed that area. Yes, I am on the Common Council, and that is in District A, which I proudly represent. but the residents in that area are upset about how these multi-story units have drastically changed that area. You have residents that have reached out to City Hall, and I believe your department, Mr. Kleppen, on Merwin Street, who now have foundation issues because of these multi-story things that are going up and shaking the foundation of these old homes. A lot of these people are seniors, elderly people who own their homes, and they don't have the means or the know with all to come and protest and say, this is not good, this doesn't benefit me. People want to feel and want to maintain a sense of neighborhood. People are sick and tired of multi-story buildings that are taking natural light out of their homes. There is a historic church that sits on the corner of 19 Academy Street, Bethel AME Church, the oldest Black church in this city. There is no natural light there anymore because Wave Point is so high. And so my concern with this proposal to zoning, Mr. Kleppen, is that we're going to get more of the same. We're going to get more developments that are going to leave a bad taste in the long-term residents' mouths that have invested in Norwalk for decades. I own my home and my street is overcrowded. I own my home and I have to fight for a parking spot. Not for me because we have a driveway, but if anyone comes to visit us, there's no parking for them because it's so much development going on. We're right off of Route 7. So I do have some concerns, but I do appreciate the efforts of your department to put this together. But I do have some concerns of us losing the charm and the neighborhood feeling that is, oh, it's time to go. That is a
Last
natural
call.
part of Norwalk. So I just wanted that to go on the public record.
Sure. In that area you're talking about specifically, there's no proposed change there from what is existing. Yeah, well, no, that's his proposal. Yeah. Not the stroke grader, but yeah, no, that street, when that was, this is before my time, but my understanding was when they rezoned that piece down there, they tried to pull those neighborhoods in with the broader rezoning, but there was resistance and they decided not to. But we haven't proposed any changes to those streets through there. The existing zoning boundaries the same.
Good evening. I'm Marlene Herrick. I'm on Emerson Street in East Norwalk. My first question to you is, when did the Connecticut Assembly decide to create a sanctuary state out of Connecticut? Do you know that? You don't, anybody know that? Okay, because my question then is, we have been forced into becoming a sanctuary state. Thank you, whatever governor did that. New York is becoming overrun and very crowded, and it's only going to be a matter of time before they start squeezing into Connecticut, claiming, oh, sanctuary state, we can stay there. And we're talking about overcrowding now. And I'm concerned about that. You know, now we have to accommodate all these, we're a sanctuary state, so now we have to accommodate all these people coming into the state. It's sort of being ignored by Connecticut. And I'm concerned because New York is a stone's throw from here. They're already pushing people into White Plains Airport and busing them out. And one evening a few months ago, I met up with two people who had giant vans with 15 seat vans that they were transporting people. And my question was, where are they going? And they wouldn't tell me. So I'm concerned about this up and coming disaster that may occur in Connecticut. TOD. Oh yeah, TOD. We have to overcrowd all the train areas because some lunatic in the state figures we need to have a TOD. I may be off the mark here, because I came in late, sorry, but today on the news, I learned that the train scheduling is going to be diminished because they don't have enough riders. Oh, isn't that interesting? Does that mean there aren't enough jobs, that people aren't traveling enough? I mean, the traffic tonight going into Westport was horrific, so I don't know whether there was an accident, but it was pretty awful. And the traffic on the freeways going north again are just 3 o'clock. It used to be 4 o'clock. You know, you'd get on the freeway and it'd be congested. Now it's 3 o'clock. And in some cases 2:30. So this continued building up of our state along the coast. I resent the fact that when we had our meeting for the Wells Fargo building, that one of your members decided to criticize all of the East Norwalk residents by saying, you don't want this development here. And nobody, after 4 hours of sitting there, nobody said they didn't want it. They just wanted alterations done. And yet he forced everyone in your group to vote, yes, we want this thing. Yes, we want to have an extra walkway around the cemetery, which meant you'd have to have 2 separate lights. Then some goofy girl said, oh, we should have a bus stop, when there's a bus stop right in front of Roger Ludlow School, which is, I don't know what it's called now. There's a bus stop that's been there 75 years, and it's a covered bus stop, I might add. So we don't need one in front of the Wells Fargo building. So I'm concerned that the quote, the charm of East Norwalk has gone down into the toilet because these developers are coming in and they want to, you know, put more housing in there. To put in housing over by the TTD, which I think is what he's talking about. That area is already crowded with Partners and the little pizza parlors and the ice cream parlor and the boat club. That's already congested. And coming around the corner, it's like people have to double park in the street in order to stop to get a Mr. Frosty. And it's just, there are little practical things that just aren't thought out. And it's really very aggravating. So when I have to go somewhere, I have to think out, okay, what time is it? How can I divert going where I need to go, where I'm not on the regular streets because it's so damn crowded. Summertime isn't even here. We've got, well, 2 weeks and after this rain, and people are going to be going down to the beach. But one of your members was saying, well, we don't have any problem in South Norwalk. No, you don't have a beach in South Norwalk. No, you don't have tennis courts and parks in South Norwalk. So you don't really care about the traffic flow. And to diminish the traffic flow over around the cemetery is insane. And to put a sidewalk around the cemetery, we don't need a sidewalk around the cemetery. And I wanted that on the record. I mean, I don't know whose brainstorm that was. So where my friend lives over by the hospital, some goofy people have decided that it was okay to put duplex housing. There's no parking. The people are just jam-packed over there with their big trucks in their work trucks and their own personal vehicles. And so it's a very congested area. On my street on Villaway Avenue, they put in I think 3 duplexes since, well, I was living in California. When I came back, holy shit, what is this? 3 duplexes. Well, they're supposed to have parking. Really? Well, they're on the street and they're all parked the wrong way. And this woman has stones in front of her house so that the road is narrowed. And that's been that way, I don't know, ever since I can remember. And that should be required to be removed because it's really public land.
Do we have
It's not-
anything on the zoning changes?
Well, that should be rezoned, her stones in the
Stones,
driveway.
I'll work on that.
You know, but you know, the houses on my street, I don't know how they're going to, we already have the duplexes put in and we have another, and people who put in, triple stories. And there's an existing one, so I guess they assume that they can do that. And that's the thing. What's the precedent on that? If there's a triple story house there, that means anybody coming in can tear down a 1-story and stick up a triple story just because it's already been done.
Anything that gets built has to comply with what the rules are. So with it, depending on where it's located, the rules might be different.
Oh, that's cheating. Okay. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else?
Very quick.
Sure.
Jason Milligan again.
Yes.
I just wanted to voice my support for what Craig had requested. And I actually was going to ask you, I forgot when I got on the affordable housing thing, why we put the lines where we did, or where you put the lines where you did, especially in that section and on the other side of West Avenue and Berkeley Street area. And Nicole answered the question. There's groups of people that aren't ready for that change. But I will say that the piece that Craig is talking about is a fairly large piece. It is very inefficient. There's not a lot of parking. The buildings are kind of far apart. It's not well designed. And it is big enough and in keeping with what has been done over there. There's no neighbors. It's around the corner. So I think it definitely should be strongly considered. And you probably have, but that's all. I will talk to you after we're done. Tell me that. My great grandmother was on Merlin.
Anybody else? Going once, going twice. Thank you.
I want to get both on the both my dad. You have them do it? Sure. All right, I'll talk to you.
Can you,
What's that? Late night, I didn't say you guys would have brought me in there, but I'm sure when I